Hi, it's time for the closing of Module 6. In this module, we focused on Part 1, thinking about concepts related to whole numbers that are important to embed within intensive intervention. In Part 2, we talked about the procedures that are important to emphasize related to whole numbers. And then in Part 3, we started to see how all of that fits together within intensive intervention. So let's go ahead and check in with our teacher, Mr. Flores.
How do I make sure that my students understand addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division on a conceptual level? How can I help them master procedures for computation?
Well, we hit both of those. We talked about whole number concepts and whole number procedures, so hopefully now Mr. Flores is much better off with his intensive intervention. So where are we here? So let's see, we've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So we just finished this part about whole number content. And what did we learn here? We learned that the concepts related to whole numbers for addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And we learned that that's absolutely foundational to everything that students are going to learn later on in mathematics. So if we're looking at our checklist, remember we want to teach the 2 concepts of addition, the 2 of subtraction, the 2 of multiplication, and the 2 here of division. Now in Part 2, we talked about the procedures that go along with these 4 operations and emphasized that that procedural knowledge should be taught after we focus on what the concepts of the operations mean, and procedures really need to be emphasized when we get into multi-digit computation. So in Part 2, we talked about the emphasis related to regrouping and the language related to regrouping. So instead of saying carry, we're going to say regroup, trade, or exchange. And the same thing goes for subtraction. Instead of saying borrow, we're going to use regroup, trade, or exchange. And we went over lots of different algorithms. I hope that you learned a lot within the Part 2. So in Part 2, our checklist included teaching place value concepts, thinking about the language of regrouping, and then understanding those different algorithms. And then finally in Part 3, we reviewed our 6 important components to intervention, these 3 that deal with the delivery of instruction and these 3 that deal with strategies that should be embedded within the intensive intervention. And we watched different examples of intensive intervention in play. So in Part 3's checklist, what does DBI look like when it comes to whole number content that's emphasized within intensive intervention? Remember, we need to be explicit, use those multiple representations, make sure our language is precise and concise, and then include fluency building activities, include problem solving instruction, and utilize a motivation component. So now it's your turn to work on the classroom application. And here I want you to think about what are the ways that you can increase your modeling related to whole number concepts, and what are the ways that you can increase your modeling related to whole number procedures. I really hope that you will pull in some of the information that we just covered in this module so that you can make your DBI framework as strong as it possibly can be. Now as we leave Module 6 and we head to Module 7, Module 7 brings us to a similar module to this one. Instead of talking about whole numbers, which is right there, we're going to talk about rational numbers. So a big focus on fractions and a little bit of a focus on decimals and percentages. So we have a reading that goes with Module 7. And this is an IES practice guide about effective fraction instruction. Just like some of the other IES practice guides that we've checked out, I hope you will review this one before we head into Module 7 because it has a lot of good background information and it talks about some of the evidence-based practices that should be employed when you are teaching students about fractions, decimals, or percentages. So go ahead and start reading that, and I will see you soon.